Hello, welcome along to a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. This week we're with Georgie Codd. Georgie writes the type of stories that I grew up on. Narrative non-fiction with a fun idea at its heart where you are committed till the end. Her new book is Never Had a Dad, in which she advertises for a father. It's been optioned for a TV series. We discuss how she works on the go when she's easily distracted, also being trained in writing prose fiction but focusing on narrative non-fiction.
Real life is nearly always so much weirder than fiction. And the things that happen in real life sometimes, I know it's a cliche, but you genuinely couldn't make it up, or if you did, somebody would just roll their eyes. Or say this isn't possible. And I find that it's such a fascinating area to be involved with and such an exciting way to engage with the world. That's what I want to keep doing in this writing career. And I've really enjoyed the things that I've been able to do so far.
And how failed attempts have taught her to not write too much too soon.
I hold back from writing the proper actual manuscript, the full draft of whatever quest or whatever it is. I hold back from writing that until I have a green light from an amber light from my agent who says, yes, this could work. I think we could find someone. And then I will wait for him to get that interest, ideally from publishers that he knows, and then I will sit down and I will write it once I know it's going somewhere.
It's all on the way with Georgie Codd in a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. Yes, welcome along to the show. My name's Dan Simpson. This is Writer's Routine, where we take a look inside an author's working day. Very simply, we see what they do. We find out how, when, and where they get the work done. How much planning goes into it? Is it just snippets of words here and there? Do they block out the whole day? What do they do? We'll find out. This week, we're with Georgie Codd. Georgie has written all sorts. She's had a go at fiction, written journalism, and it's narrative non-fiction where she's really found a home. Stories where usually there's a small adventure in the centre, just a spark of a quest, and that very quickly grows into something big. Her first book, published in 2020, We Swim to the Shark, followed Georgie's quest to overcome her deepest fears and try to swim with a shark. She studied prose writing at the University of East Anglia as a master's, where her flash fiction won awards. Since she has created the literary festival BookBound, her new one is Never Had a Dad, an adventure sparked by a trip to Scotland where a strange meeting with an older man led to her search for a father figure. We talk about the detritus that she writes in, also the difference in this writing compared with planned out and plotted fiction. What comes first? The idea, the writing, is it natural? How organic is it? How does she remember what's happened when she's writing it later? You can hear how she manages to switch between projects and what her writing life looks like. And that's where we start, as we always do, with what Georgie Codd sees around her in the place where she sits down to write.
Oh, okay. So I've got quite a nice view, kind of off to the right of me, where I can see up to a pretty nice looking hill. The clouds are over it today, but it's nice to have some green in my eye line. I have quite a few plants in my study, and some of them aren't looking that happy. I think because it's a bit cold at the moment, so I've had to have the heating on, and some of them are protesting, but luckily not all of them are having a terrible time. I have photographs up on the wall around me that show various different things in black and white. Photographs taken by my biological father, funnily enough, that I was given by his brother. So they're up on the wall. And a picture of my favourite dog in the world behind me as well, who is, alas, with us no more, but he's here in spirit.
Okay. To just Tell us as much about that dog as you are emotionally comfortable to do.
His name was Albie, and I really resented him at the beginning because he replaced another legendary dog that my mum owned, who had died, and Albie came along, and we had a few conversations where I told him he was never going to be as good as Badger.
And wouldn't you know it, what a surprise.
He overtook. He died a couple of years ago, far too early. He was a Jack Russell. And they often live for kind of 16 years or around then. And he died very early of a kidney infection, and it was horrible. And so I miss him a lot, but it's nice to have the feel of him in this room with me.
Well, yeah, that's it's kind of brilliant that he can always it sounds as if but he can always be there. That's really cool. What about more planning and plotting detritus? I know that we're going to talk about this, the nature of what you write and how that's planned and plotted. But is there, if you were in the middle of a project, would I find notes? Would I find post-it notes, maybe diary entries or timelines around you?
Yeah, I think detritus is a really good word. It's very detritus-y here. So I've got a big file of receipts and things to the left of me because a lot of my research involves going to places and traveling, and I have to keep track of what I've spent for my tax return. Very exciting that is too. Lots of notebooks with different headers on them, depending on which project I'm working on. I also write as a freelancer, kind of marketing things to support the creative nonfiction writing. So you will see stuff around that and kind of timesheets and how long I've spent on this brief and that brief. There's a lot of stuff here. Diaries, all sorts. Actually, diaries I tend to keep, or journals type things, I tend to keep on my laptop, and I just add in new bits and pieces or interesting snippets I've heard somewhere about the thing I'm working on. Might be a radio show or a TV program. And I have a live document on Word that I just keep updating at any time I hear something good that I think, I might want to use that in the future.
Is there a format to that live document? Do you care about how it looks and how well written that is, if it's just for your notes for later?
No, it's really, really rough and kind of embarrassingly so. Like if I get hit by a bus tomorrow and somebody decides, let's finish Georgie's next project for her after she's dead, they're going to have problems. They're probably not going to be able to follow my train of thought. There's spelling mistakes, grammar errors, all sorts, but that's fine as long as I've got the keywords in there and I can do a Control F find search. Because often when I'm in a nonfiction project, I'll comb back through those notes before I start the writing. And there'll often be a little nugget that I kind of half remember at some point, and it was something to do with penguins, say, and so I'll Control F penguin and hopefully it'll turn up. Keep it rough just so I can get it out and get on with whatever else I'm doing that day.
Because of the nature of what you write and maybe the more travel-y non-fiction stuff, how adaptable are you to maybe having to write on the go, write on trains, write on planes, write whenever is necessary?
I really struggle with writing when I have a lot of distraction around me. So I tend to save the kind of in the zone focused work for when I'm back somewhere with a desk and a keyboard and a bit of peace and quiet. I can't even do cafes that well, really. I just get so easily distracted. So when I'm on the go, if important things are happening and I need to write them down, it will be rough again. All the rough stuff might be it, jotting it down in a notebook, popping it on the laptop. And that tends to get me by.
Notebooks, how precious are you about what they look like and what you're using to write in them with?
They there's a theme here. They also look pretty terrible. I am quite precious about them in the sense that if they went missing, I would be really wound up and unable to settle. So I write my email address and my mobile phone number in every notebook that I know I'll be taking out of the house at some point, because sometimes it would just be a little corner of text, but it's really, really important, some really important note or an email address I've got, or some aid memoir that I know I have to go back to and check this book page, whatever. And if that's missing, I feel really flustered. So I keep them very close to me. They're always in a very protected part of my backpack when I'm out and about. And when I'm at home, they're right next to me on the desk here.
And just finally on how stuff looks when you are in your study on the desk. Are you precious about what software you use? Have you any strong font opinions there, Georgie?
Strong font opinions. Oh, I don't think I do. Although this probably make me sound like a complete narcissist. I really like the font Georgia. So I often use Georgia. Even though if anyone calls me Georgia, I say, no, that's not my name. I'm a Georgie. So yeah, I like a Georgia font. And then in terms of software, I find the basics. I use Microsoft Word. I wish I had been one of those people who had an Apple, one of those computers growing up, but I didn't. So I'm really used to PC, even though I hear Apple is wonderful in lots of ways for writing and things. And I do a mix of when I'm involved in a project and drafting and going through edits and things like that, I will print a copy when I'm at key points. So I'll take it off the laptop, get it printed, get it on the page and sit with it. And I work between the two. So on the screen and on the page, the paper page. And that tends to bring out much more of the errors and things that I might not otherwise see if I was on the screen.
Well, let's talk about the routine, Georgie. So a day in the life of you writing your books, how does the whole thing look? And also, where are they placed? Are they? This is quite a vague thing, but do you save everything up? Is it all notes along the way, and then you just write furiously when you've returned from a curious quest? Are you kind of doing it as you go? And also take us through the day.
Okay, so I'll start with the day. I naturally wake up quite early, but I don't tend to get out of bed until I've done some word puzzles. That's my treat. So I have some word puzzles, some crosswords, whatever.
Which puzzles do you do, Georgie?
I do. So I got hooked on the New York Times selection of like crossword, spelling bee, Wordle, pips, all these little things.
What's your order? I know there's an order. There must be an order. I have an order in which I do these things every morning. What's yours?
There is an order. So I do this with food as well. The thing I enjoy the least, I will go for first, and then I'll save the best things till last. So I tend to start. New York Times has this thing called Letterboxd. Do you know that one?
I do. It's not on my list. I've had to look. This is about you and your order, but I've had to heavily curate mine because it was just taking up so much time.
It does take up so much time. So yeah, I'm totally with you there. And Letterboxd, I'm thinking of dropping because I find it so frustrating for listeners who haven't played it. You kind of go, you have to make words and there are letters on each corner of a square. And the words that you make have to use all the letters within a certain amount of goes, blah, 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 blah. It's really annoying. I find it really difficult. So I try and do that one first. And then I build up. I do the Wordle somewhere in the middle because I have a good track record with Wordle. And then I ultimately will build up to the proper job crossword, which when I started out getting hooked on these things, I was terrible at. I was really, really bad. but I've started to work out there are certain words. I don't know if this is a recognized thing. It must be. There are certain words that pop up all the time in a New York Times crossword, like orcas and I can't think of anything else right now. Orcas comes up all the time. If in doubt, put in orcas. So I do all that. And then I'll have my cup of cocoa, no milk, just cocoa and water. Very, what is that? Is that like purist? I don't know.
Dickensian, perhaps.
Dickensian, yeah.
I don't think I've spoken to anyone who starts a day with a cocoa.
Oh, it's really an excellent way to start the day. It's not sweet. It's just a good old hit of the cocoa bean. And then I will rouse myself, have a shower, have my porridge, with cocoa nibs, double cocoa. I think I might have a cocoa problem. And peanut butter and apple. And then I feel ready to go, and I will come in. And usually by that point, it's about 9 o'clock. I like to start working just before 9 o'clock, because I like to try and make my writing as much as like an office type job, hours wise, as I can. And the reason I do that isn't to make myself sit there till 5 p.m, because I often don't. It's more so that if I feel a project is massive and it could take up all my time and possibly even take over my life, I have those set hours between 9 and 5, Monday to Friday, and that's where I'll put in that time.
So you start at 9, you want to put in the time. How does your energy ebb and flow through that space? Do you find yourself kind of working for 6-7 hours? Are you breaking for lunch? Do you have to give yourself 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off? How's that working?
It depends on the project, and it depends on my general level of energy on a particular day. So if I'm really, really struggling with a passage or some editing, or maybe writing about something that's quite intense and emotionally draining, I will pace myself a lot more. So I'll build in breaks. I try to build in breaks anyway, just small ones to get up, have a shift on my seat, stop my blood just pooling in my toes and never being able to get back up my legs again. Just move. And movement, I think, as well, just helps with thinking often. And if a sentence is stuck, and I unstick myself sometimes within moments of leaving my chair and popping to the kitchen or the loo or whatever, I'll come back and I know what I'm doing. But as a rule, I live for my 12 o'clock lunchtime.
You're quite particular with the breakfast offering. Is there a standard lunch fare?
There isn't. I really like to mix that one up, but there's no cocoa. I should say that the cocoa's gone by then. So lunchtime, I'll nearly always cook something, so it's something warm. I tend to have a bigger meal at lunchtime than I do at dinner time, and it feels like quite a treat. And it's a really good motivator to be as productive as possible in the morning, because I find that my energy levels and often my productivity levels when I'm doing creative work slump after lunchtime.
Is that because you're having a nice, warm, hearty bowl of stew for your lunch?
Yeah, probably. I'm probably OD'd with cocoa in the morning, which has some caffeine in it. So by the time it's after lunchtime, it's all drained away. But I don't know. I've always been, and maybe this will change, but so far in my life, I've been very much a morning person, productivity wise. And I go with that. And in the afternoon, I might switch it up and do a bit of admin. There's a lot of admin around publishing and creative careers, as I'm sure you know. So yes, I have to fit in time to do that. And then obviously all of this, or maybe not obviously, but all of this gets blown out of the water if one of my freelancing clients, i.e. someone who is paying me by the hour to do some work, if they need things, then my creative nonfiction generally has to be shelved. And it's all about finishing that brief for that client and doing that job so that I still have a regular income.
How much does that affect your planning? I don't know. What are you working towards every day first off? Is it a word count? How are you figuring out what's what?
It depends on the part of the project. So when I'm doing the actual writing part, yes, I aim for a word count. So, and again, if I'm feeling like it's going to be a particularly difficult passage or grueling in some way, I will be kind to myself and lower that for myself. But often I'll aim for kind of 1,500 word chunks. So sometimes that 1,500 words comes really quickly and I think, right, I'm going to aim for another 1,500 and just get the count up while I'm in the zone. And other times, though, it's more a case of how long do I think I have the energy to work for. So I will do those tricks where I'll set my mobile phone to go off in 20 minutes and I will write solidly or edit solidly or whatever it is, solidly for 20 minutes. And then I'll give myself a 5-minute timer break where I can, I don't know, do some stretches, roll around on the floor, snuffle about in the kitchen. And yes, I'm now thinking about snuffling in the kitchen, so I've derailed myself.
No, that's fine. So when freelance work comes in or whatever, how adaptable have you learned to be in shelving the other writing project that you've got, being able to focus on what they want, being able to get back on track with what you want to do and getting right back into that zone? It's juggling a lot of different voices, I would say.
It is juggling a lot of different voices, and it can be quite hard on the brain. I'm lucky in that one client often doesn't have a particular deadline that they're working towards. They just want the thing done that week rather than in 2 hours' time with no notice. So I'll block out times in the week, 2 hours here, 3 hours there, when I know I'm just going to focus on that client. Another client are a bit more dynamic, and they have to make more last minute decisions and get me in more last minute. But between me and that client, and we've been working together for several years now, we've come to a point of about 4 hours from me seems to be a really useful amount of time where I can get a lot done for them and also hold a bit of time back for my stuff, my other things. So I'll do either a morning for them or an afternoon for them, unless something mega's going on, and then I'll do a whole day for them. But that's fairly rare at the moment. And then in terms of parceling off time for my creative nonfiction, it depends. Again, if I'm working to a publisher deadline, then I will have quite solid boundaries around certain days and times. I'll block out this particular day, this particular morning, and nothing can touch it. Because if I don't meet that deadline with the publisher, I will be really, really wound up with myself. I know a lot of authors kind of do kick back deadlines, and that's often accepted by the industry. But I'm one of those people where if I tell someone I'm going to do it, I will do myself possibly even physical damage trying to do the thing because I said I would do it. So yeah, I'm quite protective in full writing and full deadline mode for a book. I will hold that back.
And because of how your energy runs through the day, so after lunch you're kind of winding down through the admin. How do you know when you are done?
That's a good question. I think I have I often write lists, very messy lists, literally on the back of envelopes, and I'll do a bit of delegation for myself at the start of the week. I'll write down all the things I know I need to do in that week, and then I'll tick them off throughout the week and allocate days for them. And if there's, one more little job that I think I can do now and help out tomorrow's Georgie, then I'll squeeze that in. But usually I'll stop if I'm getting a headache or it's 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock is pretty much always like, nope, cut off, done. So I will get stuff down in my working kind of journal, that live document I mentioned earlier. I'll get that down ASAP throughout a project. The thing about nonfiction, and I'm sure you know this well, and some of your listeners might not know it, or some of the listeners to this episode might not know it, but the way that nonfiction finds a route to publication is generally very different to how fiction will get there. So with nonfiction, you'll typically have to create a proposal document, which could be anything between 8,000 and 15,000 words, maybe even a bit longer. And that document is where I will lay out, this is the project I want to do. This is the title. This is a kind of rough blurb that would appear on the back of the book for it. These are the people I'm going to interview for it. Here are my suggested chapter outlines, what I'm aiming to write. So this is the kind of rough arc of the narrative. And then you'll tack on a writing sample to the end of that. So I will often start on projects and quests because I'm very interested in that project and quest, and I want to write a book about it at some point. And so my initial burst of energy will go towards gathering as much interesting information as I can, making a plan for how that might all fit together, who else I want to be talking to, what else I want to be doing. And at that point, I will then send that to my agent and check, is this a project that you feel is publishable or that you think you could find a place for with an editor? So far, he hasn't said to me, no, this is rubbish, stop. He's always encouraged me to keep going with it. But my background, how I trained, was in writing fiction. And I wrote 3 novels, one after the other, over the course of several years. Because with fiction, you have to write the whole thing before you shop it around to publishers. And sometimes you could have spent 2 or 3 years, or way longer for some people, writing that story. And then you think, right, it's all good to go. I want to go. I'm ready to submit it to my agent. I'm ready to submit it to my editor, or find an editor. And then you can meet a brick wall. And that's what happened to me with those 3 novels. I got closer and closer to a book deal each time, but no cigar. And it was so much time. I mean, I could say it's wasted, but it honed my craft. And I can always go back to those books and reshape them and try and publish them at a later date. But I found it so frustrating as a writer, as a person who, like lots of people listening here, is writing because they want to connect with an audience. So this is a very long-winded answer to your question. I hold back from writing the proper actual manuscript, the full draft of whatever quest or whatever it is. I hold back from writing that until I have a green light from an amber light from my agent who says, yes, this could work. I think we could find someone. And then I will wait for him to get that interest, ideally from publishers that he knows. And then I will sit down and I will write it once I know it's going somewhere.
Well, that's good because it leads me to, like, when I was looking up everything about you, I saw that you got a master's in prose writing. So it was interesting that you had trained in that, but you were writing the stuff that you do. Now there is prose in there, but it is narrative non-fiction. So was there a conscious decision after those projects and those novels that you'd completed that never quite took off? There was a conscious decision to go left and do something different, but still try and communicate with that audience?
Well, it was it was kind of accidental almost. I always enjoyed reading nonfiction, but never thought as someone learning to write and aiming to be published, who am I to write a memoir kind of thing? I wasn't a celebrity. I'm still not a celebrity. I'll never be a celebrity. Not done an amazing high up job that everyone wants to hear about, etc., etc. So I didn't think that nonfiction would be a realm for me necessarily. But I'd done these 3 novels. The 3rd novel, my agent was really excited about. He's incidentally, he's the 5th agent I've had in the process of trying to get those novels published. The 5th agent I've worked with and the one I've stuck with. And he thought that this 3rd book was definitely going to go somewhere. He was very excited about it. And it didn't. It didn't go anywhere. People didn't quite understand it. And I'd kind of reached a bit of a end of my tether situation. I was fed up with not getting anywhere with that. I wasn't particularly enjoying the part-time work I was doing back then. And I just said to my agent, look, a friend's asked me to go to New Zealand for a couple of weeks. I'm going to do that. I'll be away. On my way back, I've got a little adventure. I've decided I'm going to try and learn to scuba dive and swim with the biggest fish in the world because I was afraid of fish. I had this fish phobia. And as someone with the surname Codd, that's not really acceptable. So this is like frustration in my life. And look, this is what I'm doing, agent. See you on the other side type thing. And he said, oh, hang on a minute. That shark swimming idea, that fish phobia conquering idea, that sounds quite interesting. That sounds like it could be an actual book. Would you write a proposal for me? So that's how I got kind of drawn into the nonfiction world and that space. But the having that prose background, that creative writing, more novelistic background has been so useful for aiming to create books that are gripping. Because I think I think nonfiction still is waiting for its time to shine, maybe, because it's such a broad category. It can include all sorts of really dry and dull things, can include nonfiction. I suppose what I'm writing is more like a nonfiction novel. So my nonfiction work will have a beginning, a middle, and end. It will have cliffhangers. It will have hopefully points that make it difficult to put the book down. And that's partly from things that I've learned from doing all that novel writing back in the day.
I love these types of books. And I grew up devouring, as I say, like narrative nonfiction novels, stories about people who have an idea, a quest, and they go out and do it. So I grew up vociferously reading Danny Wallace stories. I don't know if you've ever read those, but he did like Yes Man, and he did Friends Like Us, where he went and tracked down all of his schoolhood mates. There was one where there was one where he started a cult. Anyway, so I love those, and I've never asked this question before because normally it's quite trite, but because you are an author who is doing something a bit different to my usual guests, like, what stories inspired you to write what you do? Like, what are you calling upon? What were your influences? But you know what I mean.
Thank you for the question. I know what you mean about like a question, but I do think it's a helpful question. So I think it properly hit me what nonfiction novels, narrative nonfiction could do when I was in my teens and I read Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. I don't know if you know that book. It's about this.
Gets on Google.
Yeah, it's about an Everest disaster.
Yeah, do know it. Not read it, but I'm aware.
It's fantastic and horrifying, and I found it impossible to stop reading. So that showed me what was possible. And then from there, I've long been interested in the work of Louis Theroux and John Ronson.
Yeah, I know both of those. Yeah.
Yeah, both. And John Ronson's obviously, well, not necessarily obviously if listeners don't know them, but John Ronson's much more book-based and text-based in the work that he does. He does a lot of presenting radio things as well. But he and Louis Theroux both have thrown themselves into all sorts of situations for the purpose of finding a story and bringing an interesting story back to their audience. And they were both, and still are, both big influences. I am quite, I find it frustrating, and I might be wrong about this, but as far as I know, there is still not really a female Louis Theroux, female John Ronson, kind of widely acknowledged as having the same role that they do, of being the slightly quirky, absurd, almost absurdist adventure seeker. And I'm here. I'm doing that stuff. I want to do that stuff as much as I can, because I think real life is nearly always so much weirder than fiction. And the things that happen in real life sometimes, I know it's a cliche, but you genuinely couldn't make it up. Or if you did, somebody would just roll their eyes or say, this isn't possible. And I find that it's such a fascinating area to be involved with, and such an exciting way to engage with the world. That's what I want to keep doing in this writing career. And I've really enjoyed the things that I've been able to do so far.
We'll come on to the new book in just a second, and there's a few more things I want to touch on. But how much is that influencing what you do going forward? The thing with being a straight novelist is your brain, your imagination can do anything. It can go anywhere and create what it wants. You are limited by practicalities of real life and being able to buy a plane ticket, being able to travel here or there. How much does that influence what you do, and like how readily and constantly are you coming up with new fun projects that you can get involved in?
I never run out of project ideas. It's quite, I've got too many, which is not helpful in a way, because right now, as we're talking, I'm on the cusp of the next thing, and I can't decide between two. And they're both very, very different. In terms of dealing with what you call the kind of constraints of real life, I find that makes the stories generally much more interesting, or more authentic anyway. So with my first book, one of the big narrative threads, or what was pulling me along in real life, was a desire to find the biggest fish in the world, which is the whale shark. And it was so hard to find, and I won't spoiler whether I did or not in case anyone wants to read it. And I was constrained. If I'd had all the money in the world, or at least a lot more money than I did at the time, or even now, I could have immediately bought myself on a place, on a trip where I would be guaranteed of seeing whale sharks. And that would have been the book over in a few days. But I didn't have that. I was constrained. And that constraint led down all sorts of interesting routes. I also really like the synchronicity of real life. I don't know when I'm starting a project like Looking for a Whale Shark, or Looking for a Dad, which the second book is about, looking for a father figure. I have no idea when I'm starting that project where it's going to go. So for me, it doesn't feel constrained. It feels like a way of being more open to what's out there and what's possible.
Are you slightly fearful or hopeful, perhaps, that when you write more of these stories and you get a better understanding of what makes a good beginning, a middle and an end, you'll actually start to curate your journey and your quest in the idea of getting the ending that you want? I mean, it must be so hard to make that not happen.
Well, that's interesting. So with my book about looking for dads, looking for father figures, just as with the shark book, I had to put forward to the publishers before I'd completed my quest. This happened with both books. Midway through the shark search and midway through the dad search was when I was pitching this idea to publisher. Excuse me. And I had in my head and on the proposal where I thought this book would and should end, like how it should all wrap up and what would be the takeaways of this book. And in both of those adventures, real life took me a completely different way and somewhere I completely wasn't expecting. And that's a nice thing about nonfiction proposals, is you can get accepted by a publisher and the idea can evolve and mutate even as you go, because you are influenced by different things when you start doing the actual adventure. So I would hate it. Yeah, I would hate it if I started being attracted to adventures where I was sure I knew the end. But I think even if I were to start thinking that way, oh, I know how this is going to go and I'll plug myself in and, you know, just follow the route that I've set out for myself, ABC, the end. I just don't think that's how it would turn out. It's never, so far for me, life has not ever been going the way I imagine it's going to, whether that's during a period of weeks, months, or years. There's these things that interrupt, stop the hero or heroine from reaching the thing that they want to reach. And that's immediate tension and immediate drama and immediately more interesting for me to write and be part of, and hopefully more interesting for readers to engage with too.
We're back with more from Georgie in just a second. This week's episode is sponsored by Whale Cemetery. It's the new book in the DCI Finnegan Yorkshire Crimes Thriller series. There are 12 books in that series now by Eli North. So much that you can get involved in. Find out more, get to elinorthcrimefiction.com. You can take a look in the episode notes wherever you're listening. And while you are there, there is a way for your book to sponsor the show. If you've written something, if you've worked on a creative endeavour that deserves more shouting, it needs more ears on it, well, let me do that for you. To make that happen, to support us and sponsor the show, it's patreon.com/writers routine. You can also support us because you enjoy what we do. There's merch, there's bonus content on there. Patreon, that's for a rolling monthly pledge. However much you can give goes a long way. It helps me keep bringing you these chats with the best authors around as often as I can. I completely get that doing it on a month-by-month basis, maybe it isn't always easy. So you can make it a one and done, absolutely fine. If you get to ko-fi.com/writers routine, ko-fi.com, I should say, you can just send us a one-off tip, just a little bit of help for the show. One and done, that is perfectly fine. There are links to both of those, Ko-fi and Patreon, in the episode notes where you're listening. Let's get back to it then. We're chatting to Georgie Codd this week about her new book, Never Had a Dad. You can hear why a strange meeting on holiday led her to search for a father figure. Also, the key question to writing memoir, how does she make sure that readers care? It's a big assumption, isn't it? That some random reader cares about your life and what you've done. How does she drag them along with her? And we get back to it with that very first idea for Never Had a Dad.
So I had got a publishing deal for the shark book, and I was probably in midst of edits for that book and thinking, what will I do next? What's going to be my next project? I just don't know. And my mum asked me if I wanted to go on a cruise with her round the kind of north coast of Scotland and to see the islands of Shetland. And I was very excited to do that. My grandmother, who raised me with my mum, she died a couple of years before that. So mum had a little bit of inheritance money, and that was the plan. We go up to Shetland and we have a lovely time together, and it's a good break for me, etc., and for her. Anyway, we were on this cruise, and within a few days, we met a man who was also traveling, and he was traveling solo. His name was Peter. He was 70 years old, never been married, and never had kids. And he was a retired firefighter, so he had all these amazing stories about, roofs blowing off and throwing pugs out of windows and that kind of thing. So we enjoyed spending time with him. And on the day that we were supposed to get into Shetland, we had awful weather and we got rerouted. So literally watched the islands drift past us. Actually, that's not quite literally. Islands don't drift past us, do they? But we drifted past them. And we got rerouted to this really not Shetland place called Invergordon, which is on the east coast of the Scottish mainland. And one of the things Invergordon is known for is repairing oil rigs. So we kind of came into the harbour and there's all these oil rigs in the harbour, and tried to do a walk together, Mum and I, and it was a rubbish walk and we could only find ourselves next to A roads and we were having a rubbish time. Anyway, we went back into town feeling quite disappointed and dejected and all of those words when we bumped into Peter. He asked if we'd like to have a drink. So sure, we're not doing anything else. The three of us went to a community cafe in the town and we sat down on a table of 4. And after a minute or two, a woman approached the table and asked if she could sit with us. And without any hesitation, Peter said, "Oh, please do. I was just telling my wife and daughter it would be lovely to have some company." My mum's facial expression was quite something to behold. Not particularly impressed, I think, would be a gentle way of putting it. And Peter saw that and immediately corrected himself and said, "Sorry, ex-wife, we like to go on holiday still for Georgina, keep the family together." So this woman sat down with us and I had to make a split second decision. Do I out him and tell her this is a lie and we've only just met him really, we barely know the man, or do I go with it? And I decided to go with it. So I said to her, "Oh, don't mind Pops, he's insane." And we role played this for about 20 minutes, my mum saying almost nothing, which is very, very unlike her. And the woman clearly thought that we were a bit nuts, but she also seemed to believe that we were a family. And Peter was doing all these things like rubbing the dirt off my sunglasses and compliment, "Oh, Georgina's a writer. Did you know she got a first book coming out soon, blah, blah, blah." And I realized afterwards that was the first time that a man of fatherly age had ever spoken to me and about me in that fatherly way, because my paternal father vamoosed before I was born. Anyway, we got out of the cafe and the lady had left and my mum's still saying very little, but we seemed to have got away with our charade. And she popped into the pharmacy. Peter and I were on the pavement together and he said he'd always wondered what it would be like to have a daughter. And that planted this seed. I thought, I've always wondered what it would be like to have a dad. And there must be, statistically, think of all the billions of people in the world, there must be other people who think like Peter. And I must be able to find myself a father figure. Even though I'm 31, it's possible. So that's what set that second book and that quest in motion.
So there are so many, like the quest could have ended there. Peter seems like quite a fun dude. He likes to say yes to the moment. I mean, a bit weird, but that's fine. It could have ended there and you could have taken him on. So you decide this is going to be a bigger quest than that. What happens next? Because it must be, I speak to a lot of novelists. What happens next there is they imagine their inciting incidents. They get to learn their characters, whereas that's all to come for you. So what happens next with your grand plan?
So the reason I thought I can't go with Peter for this is partly because he has a real affinity for waitresses and makes loads of inappropriate comments. And I thought, I can't have a dad like that. And also, Peter had a terminal cancer, and I had already lost family members to cancer. And I was very wary of getting close to someone who I might quickly lose anyway. So I was thinking, I need to expand the pool. And I decided to advertise. I'm putting that in air quotes, even though you can't see it. I made up this phrase. I thought, where can I find my ideal father figures? Right, I just need to think of the newspapers and magazines that they might be reading. I got a spreadsheet together and I started contacting sales departments for advertising spaces. And so on a practical level, that's where I went next. I wasn't sure that this would turn into a book. I wasn't sure that publishers would want to publish it. I wasn't sure that I'd have what it took to write it all up. I had no idea what would come out of it, whether it would be something worth writing about or interesting enough for a reader. But because I'm a writer, it was in the back of my head. And it was quite a helpful crutch. And I'm sure other nonfiction writers and people like John Ronson and Louis Theroux feel the same. I thought, if this all goes horribly wrong, which is quite possible to do, I have the ability to write about it. And even if it's a terrible thing and, I get attacked or whatever, it's all material. One day I can write about it. It was a crutch that kept me going and thought, let's try it. But it was a long time of doing the project before I got an actual proposal together and shared that with my agent. And it was a long time after that before I actually got a publishing deal.
When do you know, when you're embarking on a project like this, when the end point is, when the end of this tale is?
That's a good question.
It might be one that's answered in the book. Like, it might be an obvious end point.
Well, I think endings are a bit of a fallacy, aren't they, with real life? Because things don't end. These are life stories that keep tumbling on, regardless of whether or not you've put a full stop on it and that's your final chapter. Going back to an earlier discussion that we've had here, I thought that it would end in a certain place, and this is what I pitched to my publishers, that where I look around me and I feel like I have all the family I need already and all my friends, and that's all I need, and my then partner and I would live happily ever after, and that's great. That's what I thought the end would be, and that's what I was working towards when I actually started writing it. But life took a big detour and changed things. And I was presented with interactions and challenges that I wasn't expecting that are in the book. And deciding where to end that book was difficult. And there are people who've read the book who have replied, got in touch and said they wanted an epilogue. They wanted more. They felt like there was more that could come out of it. I personally like books which don't have neatness and which give you a resolution. You've reached a point that's different to the point that you started out at. But that doesn't mean everything's all fine now, because for me, that's not how life works.
There are a few things to think about, I think, with this next question, all about the style of writing and about yourself as a character in this. I guess, and this might sound a bit brutal, and I don't mean it in this way, but I guess the problem with like a memoirish novel or a like narrative nonfiction is it's very easy for a reader to ask, why do I care, right? Why do I care that you are scared of fish and you want to go and find a big shark? Why do I care that you're trying to hunt down a new dad? It's an interesting idea, but I've got to invest a lot of time, a lot of reading into it. What are you doing to make me care? You can't create a new character from scratch. So you can't give me more to the story than your story. So what are you doing? How much are you thinking about that?
I think a lot about what I'm giving my reader. I think a lot. So I do a lot of plotting. In terms of, and by plotting, obviously I can't make up things that haven't happened. And I can't create characters. What I can do is zoom in and spend more time on events, conversations, pieces of information and research that I've found seem to grip people when I share stories face to face. So a lot of my process involves actually just having a lot of chats with different people, friends, family, sometimes random people at the bus stop, just having a normal chat and then dropping in, oh yeah, I've been doing this quite funny, strange, weird project recently, and seeing what about it engages them and what they want to hear more about and what they're not interested in. All with the caveat, of course, that we all want different things from books. And there will be plenty of people out there who would see this is a book about a person who's afraid of fish who goes to find a shark. They'd see that and go, yeah, so what? And this is about a person who wants to find a dad because they never had one. Yeah, big deal. Those people immediately take themselves out of the equation. They're not interested. I'm not interested in engaging them, really. I know that my primary readers are the people who are especially curious about weird happenings, and like with the shark book, that so there's the core narrative of looking for the whale shark, but I thought that's not enough to interest most readers all the way through. What else is interesting? What's going on here? And I started looking at how did other people conquer their fears and phobias in the water. And I started interviewing really brave and maybe a bit like crazy scuba divers who were doing these incredible feats and breaking records and risking their lives, and including their stories that are inherently, for me, really, really, really interesting and all build into the collective, the shared story about fear and overcoming fear in the water, in the deep, dark sea. And then, so with the father, the dad book, Never Had a Dad, I did a similar thing. So the core narrative of me putting out my dadverts, starting to receive messages, the kinds of messages that I was sent, loads of them are extremely interesting. It's a fascinating study of how men and women interact and what people expect from each other. But again, I like nonfiction where I learn a lot along the way as a reader. I'm the same as a writer. So another process was learning, well, what is a dad? What does a dad do that a mum can't do? I don't actually know any of this stuff. Who knows it? Who can tell me things? And so doing that allowed me to add extra layers that I have been told other people find really, really interesting too. And that's another way to draw a reader in and keep them engaged and keep them feeling curious and wanting to know more.
Talking about the fact that you are the writer of this story, yet which means it's an interesting one with these types of stories, because it's not like it's not a history novel. It's not a political book. You are presenting your side of the fact. You're presenting the story as you saw it. Now, as a reader, I'm buying into a contract with you that there is a fair amount of truth in that, whereas I always like to imagine there is some theatre along the way. We've kind of come out of a year where one of the most famous female-written books of this ilk was Salt Path by Raina Wynn. Just after the film came out, there was a big expose that many people had argued she wasn't as truthful as I think she made out. What do you think about that contract that you're buying into with me as a reader?
I think it's really, really important to honour the truth of a story and present authenticity. So for me, I don't, and I'm not saying, and I don't think any of us can say at this point for sure what, if anything, Raina Wynn did or didn't tell the truth about. I think that's all still being played out. But I think it's really important. I sometimes really wake up in the middle of the night while I was writing the dad book. I would wake up and think, oh my God, did I remember that right? Hang on a minute. Is this really what happened? And to stay along a truthful path and keep the authenticity, that's when my working document that I had been keeping throughout that project, updating every day, this conversation happened, this is what was said. And of course, we all remember things differently and we notice things differently. And there's a point at which some truth is subjective, but there are also some undisputable truths. And if there's anything in my work that I think is more subjective, I will try and make that very clear that, oh, I thought this, or I interpreted it as this, or I saw this, I saw that, I heard this, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, there's a lot of process around writing nonfiction for publication where you will also work with a legal team. You'll have a legal read to go through and just get sign off from as many people as is appropriate and possible that you featured in the book, for them to say, yes, this is how I recall it as well. Or no, this isn't quite what I meant, etc., etc. So there are these checks and balances in there to make sure that you're presenting a gripping but also truthful story.
And that is it for this week's Writer's Routine with Georgie Codd. Her new book, Never Had a Dad, a brilliant adventure, really fun, really silly, and very serious too. You can find it, you can get a copy, use the link for our bookshop.org page in the episode notes wherever you're listening. That will really support us. It goes towards Georgie and your local independent bookshop as well. There are loads of different ways that you can help out the show on Ko-Fi, on Patreon. You can get over to our Substack for a more or less weekly newsletter. Again, links are in the episode notes. This week's episode of Writer's Routine is sponsored by Whale Cemetery, the new novel by Eli North. Find out more, Eli North at crimefiction.com. And I will see you next week with a brand new episode of the show. Until then, happy writing. Thank you for listening.